Well, welcome everyone. We're going to get started here. I'm going to move on to our first slide. I would like to just say thank you very much for joining the session this evening. This was initially started because myself and Janine, who's going to be doing the genealogy tonight, have been talking about doing a Canadian heritage program of learning our ancestry and documenting it. And with all of the changes that have come up with Bill C-3, the reinstitution of Canadian citizenship by descent, we were lucky enough that Amelia Cotto had become involved with the festival this past fall, and she agreed generously to come in and be our legal, I don't know about advisor if I want to use that term, but definitely help us to see the lay of the land. So we have our program this evening with a couple of sections. The first will be presented by Amelia Cotto. We're going to talk about Bill C-3 and how it impacts those who might be Canadian by descent. We'll spend about 15 minutes in that section of the presentation, and then we'll move to tracing genealogy. What are some of the basic ways of finding the documents that you're going to need to prove that you're a Canadian by descent? And again, we'll spend about another 15 minutes there. And then I'll come in with a bit of a softer side of this, in the sense that I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the cultural implications of picking up and repatriating to Canada as a Canadian citizen. What does that mean? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the factors you should be thinking about? I'm not here to tell you how to move or what to do in that regard. This is really the softer side of the culture issues. We will have a question and answer at the end, and we ask that you post your questions in the chat. We have two moderators who are going to let us know what the most pressing questions, so that we can address as much as we can in this setting. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Shannon Mondu. I am the creator and director of Geneaology, which is currently the largest Canadian cultural festival outside of Canada. And I'm a dual citizen who moved here about 20 years ago. And I'm an alumni of the University of Windsor, with both a degree in psychology and a degree in education. I came here 20 years ago with my husband and our sons, and I love this country. I really do. But I love my homeland too. And so I'm very excited to host this event and share with you the information that might help you to also become a Canadian citizen yourself. The Geneaology became a thing after the pandemic, when I decided if I couldn't get to Canada, Canada was going to come to me. And we now have a very robust, joyful celebration, day-long event here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Amelia Cotto is an immigration expert. She is a Canadian-US dual citizen, happens to be from my hometown, and she's a dual licensed immigration lawyer practicing Canada and US immigration law. She focuses on cross-border family immigration and citizenship matters. Amelia has helped clients navigate the changes for multi-generational families and has also personally navigated the Canadian citizenship grants within her own family, giving her a practical, firsthand understanding of how complex these cases can be. Her work centers on helping families navigate their options with clarity and peace of mind. And couldn't we all use a little bit of that? Janine Guimont-Cotugno is a Canadian genealogy expert. I have known Janine now for about 3 years. She is our genealogist at the festival. We actually have a booth and people come and learn about Canadian heritage. She's been doing this for 40 years, and she happens to be the child of 2 Quebec-born parents and has identified over 2,000 great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers, mainly French-Canadian. Janine has published her findings in several genealogy journals and has been a speaker at genealogy presentations. She also provides these resources very generously and is a member of the Kalamazoo Valley Genealogical Society. We're very lucky to have these panelists with us. And those you don't see or won't see today are our moderators, Jax Anger Pipe, who is a Canadian by descent and also also bilingual, and my husband, Dan Mondu, who is also a Canadian by descent. What you will find out is that most of us are related in one way or another, interestingly enough. So I'm going to turn this over to Amelia Cotto now. She's going to head our Canadian citizen by descent legal changes update. And with that, Amelia, go ahead.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you for building such a good Canadian community in Michigan. I was so happy when I found out that there was this festival of Canadians close by. I'm in Rochester. My office is based in Troy and in Windsor. And if you want to go to the next slide, Shannon, before I became a mom, I already was an immigration lawyer. So I was really concerned with my future grandchildren not being Canadian, to the point that I actually contemplated, even though I was living about an hour from the border, giving birth in Canada so that my kids would be born in Canada and then my grandkids would have access to being Canadian as well. And so when this litigation and law came to be, I was so excited because, I was actually born in Honduras, not in Canada, but I grew up in Canada from when I was a young girl. My whole family immigrated, and I really consider Canada home. And I wanted to continue having my kids, even though, my family now lives in the US. I wanted them to continue having those Canadian ties. And so this litigation that arose out of it is because of families that wanted to have these ties and that had really strong ties, but for careers and different reasons had to live abroad. And then if their children happened to be born abroad, now their whole family was impacted for future generations. So that's my personal story. Let's move on to the next slide, Shannon. And so the Borquist litigation was a very strategic litigation. The lawyers that did this litigation actually had many families to pick from, and they picked the ones that were going to move the needle the most, because they knew how impactful this change would be. So they were successful in challenging the first generation limit. And I should back up and explain what that first generation limit is. And so essentially, the first generation limit was introduced in around 2009, I believe, but don't quote me. I've been looking at so many dates recently. And what that meant is that the first generation, either born or naturalized, was eligible. So for example, I was not born in Canada, but I was naturalized a naturalized Canadian citizen before my children were born. So my children are Canadian citizens, but then their kids would not be able to be Canadian citizens. So that's the first generation limit. So the Borquist litigation, the court agreed that the first generation limit was unconstitutional, and then the law doesn't change right away. So what ended up happening is that the government said, okay, we're going to change the law to something that does not interfere with people's constitutional rights, but we need some time. And so from 2023 to 2025, there was this interim measures where people could apply, and it was a discretionary grant. And often these applications, the applicants did have to show some type of hardship, or at least that's best practice. I don't know if everyone did, but you have to say, I'm impacted by this change. It has been deemed unconstitutional, and I would like to be Canadian because. So they had thousands of these applications, and they continued to process them until the law formally was changed. And that was formally changed very recently, December 15, 2025. And so on that date, now there is no first generation limit. And now what are called lost Canadians are Canadian citizens, but you have to apply for proof that you are a Canadian citizen. And of course, even if someone is a Canadian citizen, if you don't have proof, then you're not able to access a lot of the benefits of being a Canadian citizen. So so now there's going to be two different rules. So if you are born before this change, so December 15, 2025, certain rules apply. And if you are born after December 15, 2025, other rules apply. And so if you are born beforehand, there is no limit. So for example, if you learn from Janine today how you had a great 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 grandfather, grandmother that was a Canadian citizen, you could be eligible. There is no limit to generations for that were born before this date. For future generations, now there is going to be a substantial connection test, which means for people that are going to be born after this date, so the example that I used of my grandchildren, their parent, so my children, are going to have to prove that they have spent at least 1,095 days before the birth of their children. And so knowing that is really important because you can start keeping track, as I am, of every time we spend time in Canada so that in the future one day they'll be able to say, absolutely, we meet this substantial connection test. And I'm going to explain how it's also not that simple because the citizenship laws have changed a lot. And the trend I think that we're seeing in immigration worldwide is that there's a push to limit who can become a citizen, who can get in. And so one of the things that I'm going to say is if you have the opportunity now, if you think that opportunity is there, it's not guaranteed to be there forever, but if the law changes in the future, they don't take away people's citizenship. So while the opportunity is there, I would encourage you to take it because as you will see, and as I will explain, the laws have changed a lot and citizenship laws has changed a lot. And it tends to be for the more restrictive, unless there's litigation like this, to open it up again. I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so what are some common misconceptions and limitations? The generational limits that I mentioned is one. So there are no more limits to generations. That's a very common question that I get. Okay, but even if it's 4 generations removed, I can still apply. Yes, you might still be eligible. The main thing is that you have to prove that each generation before you was in fact Canadian. And this is where the complexity of this whole framework comes in. Because, for example, there was certain periods of time where the maternal line passed the citizenship differently than the paternal line. There were certain periods of time where if you were born out of wedlock and depending on who your parent was, you were or you were not a citizen. There was also certain periods of time where dual citizenship was not recognized. So for example, if the ancestor became a dual citizen, they had to give up Canadian citizen. There is also the possibility that previous generations have taken access steps to actually renounce their Canadian citizenship. So it is not as simple as, okay, I have a great, great, great grandmother and now I want citizenship. When you are putting together this application, the key that most people miss is that I'm going to say there are some officers that are reviewing these applications that will take the time to see if the person qualifies if they're just sent a bunch of documents. But most officers are not going to do that. They don't have the time, and that's not really their role. The applicant has the burden of proof. You have to show why you are a Canadian citizen and why each previous generation qualifies. And so, that's where the legal analysis comes in of trying to find out what the law was. So you need to know when the birth was, any naturalization. And that is the one piece of the puzzle that I'm going to say when someone says, oh, I applied and I got denied, I'm not sure why, is they didn't have the naturalization piece. That's one of the documents that oftentimes people miss. So if your ancestors lived in various countries, not just United States, but other countries, if they became citizens, that does matter. And you have to provide those dates. And that's why when you're filling out the form, you'll see it asks you about other naturalizations. It asks you about the time they have spent in Canada because those things matter. And because of the laws have been so different over the years, there's those changes. The other thing is that before 1947, that was the first Canadian Citizenship Act. So before 1947, people were considered British subjects, and the 1947 Act gave citizenship to the people that were born in what is now known as Canada. But if they naturalized, they didn't become Canadian citizens. But then there could have been laws that cured those, essentially them not becoming citizens. But what I'm trying to explain is that you really have to look back with the dates and your specific situation to see if you're going to be eligible and what the interpretations are of the law. So there is a website, and I think we're going to do a resources page. So I'm going to provide it to Shannon so that she can share it with you all. But there is a website, a Canada.ca website that has all of the changes to the Citizenship Act. And the book that I use the most when I'm preparing one of these applications is the Annotated Citizenship Act. And you can buy it online by Thomson Reuters. And I think it costs about $220. And you can find all of the text of the previous citizenship acts. And it makes it, you can look back and say, okay, this ancestor was born then, what was the law? And then go from there. It's easy to have all of the previous versions of the act in one place. Okay, I think that is it. Do I have one more slide? I can't recall.
Yes.
Okay, yes. So next steps. So the gathering evidence part tends to be a sticking point for a lot of people, and sometimes, that's where applicants get stuck. So the fact that Janine is here and going to teach you how to find a lot of these documents is going to be extremely helpful. So I'll let her cover that. Then, you want to verify the eligibility. So once you have your family tree, you can start comparing the time. A lot of the applications that I've done, actually, there will be more than one Canadian like ancestry line. So it's good to follow that too, because, maybe you don't qualify. This person actually gave up their citizenship, but then you have another relative that is eligible. So that is another thing. So once you have your family tree, you can see if there are various lines that you can provide as evidence. And then the applying, I'm going to say that it's not guaranteed that this opportunity is going to be open forever. So if you have the chance, I would encourage you to take it. And it's just a great option to have if you have those Canadian ties and you feel you feel those ties to Canada. And one of the things that I will also say is that sometimes I've had certain Americans, clients that don't feel comfortable with pledging allegiance to King Charles or whoever is in place. So that's something that you also have to consider if you are going to be applying. Sometimes, in the citizenship certificate, it'll have like a pledge of allegiance, and not everyone feels comfortable with that. So it's good to know in advance so that you're not feeling conflicted at the end after you've gone through all the trouble.
Thank you, Amelia. And I know that we'll have time at the end for questions. So please put your questions in the chat, and the moderators are going to be looking at those. Next up, well, there's Amelia's contact info. We'll also have that at the end. And you can also check out that information as well, was in the sign-up sheet. So here we're going to turn this over to Janine Guimont-Coutinho. Thank you, Janine, and off you go.
Hello, everyone. So obviously, I'm going to be talking about genealogy tips for locating these records. From what Amelia has told us, it is crucial to have the acceptable documents. So I see two questions that you could answer by doing some research. The first is, are you really eligible for Canadian citizenship by descent? Do you really have an ancestor who was born in Canada? Maybe grandma always said she was born in Canada, but you've got to have the proof. So in genealogy, the first thing we do is we collect information. whatever we have at home or our families have, to see if we can answer the question that way. So we're going to assume in this case that grandma and grandpa have passed. And so you're going to talk to older relatives, see what they know, what they can share with you. Find out who cleaned out grandma's apartment or house after she passed. Did they find important papers? Hopefully they did not throw them away. And there may even be newspaper clippings that can be helpful. They can give you hints. For instance, there may be a newspaper clipping of grandma's obituary. And in it, it might say she was born in Ontario, Canada. Now that's a great hint that's going to push you in the right direction. Pushing in the right direction is great, but you actually have to have an acceptable proof document. Now, both the US and Canada, as well as all the states and provinces, each have their own archives for all these records. But the fastest and easiest way to do this, and what genealogists do, is we search the major genealogy databases. Now, there are the big four: ancestry.com, MyHeritage, Finding My Past, and Family Search. The first three are subscription databases, so you've got to pay in order to use them. But Family Search is free. It is run by the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, and they have the largest genealogy library and database in the world. So I usually tell people, when you're first beginning, try Find My Family Search first. Slide, please. Okay, so proof documents that you may need. We're going to go over a couple. Amelia talked about them. Vital statistics are the ones that you're going to use the most important. And those are birth, marriage, and death records. And these records are developed and they're archived by the states or the provinces. Additionally, some other records can give you great hints, like census records. Various years, they had different questions on the census, but usually there was an age. Frequently it was, where were you born? And are you a citizen? So they can give you great hints. And as Amelia pointed out, those naturalization records or adoption records would be extremely important. So depending on your circumstances, you may have to search US databases, records, or Canadian ones. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk about Family Search a bit here. I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the steps and give you a hint that I use to make it the easiest way to do this. First thing you do is you go to the website, www.familysearch.org, and you'll come up with this homepage here. Now, it is free, but you do have to create an account. So you can see in the far right corner there is a button, Create Account. And that's what you're going to do. Next slide. So once you have your account, now you're going to be able to search. I'm going to tell you the easiest and fastest way to do this is you go to the ribbon at the top and you find the search pull-down menu. And on that, the two most important ones that you're going to look for or that you're going to use are records, which is the first one on the list. And then much further down, research wiki. That's going to be a real shortcut to getting information. Next slide. So once you have your account, etc., and you hit the search button for records, this is what's going to come up. And of course, you put in the name, a place very important. And if you have a date range, that's really helpful, because remember, this computer brain here is going to be searching millions and millions of records. So the more filters that we have, the better. You can even add a family member, like father. That way, the father's name may come up in a birth certificate. Next slide. So I'm only showing you a screenshot here. So I can only show you a little bit at a time, but this is a continuing page for a while. And the next filters are right underneath the slide I just showed, and they are find a collection. So in our case, we're going to look for Ontario birth records. Or another way to filter is search by place, which we would put Ontario. Next slide, please. Now, that is sometimes a long way to do this. You get hung up a lot. So this is the research wiki. When you go back to that pull-down menu on the home page and you hit the search button and then you go down on the list to research wiki, you're going to come up with this. It's going to give you a map of the various continents. And you click on where this individual lived. So in our case, for grandma, it's North America. When you click that, it brings you a list of the countries in North America. Of course, it would be Canada. And then when you hit Canada, it brings you a list of the provinces. So you can see here the list of the provinces. For us, we're going to be looking at Ontario. So we will be clicking that one. Next slide. So when you click Ontario, you come to an Ontario, Canada whole page of genealogy resources, websites, links, etc. And every province, as well as every US state, has a page just like this. Now, I'm going to draw your attention to the right sidebar, because the fastest way to do what I'm going to show you is you're going to see beginning research, and there are 4 options. The third one is record finder. And of course, we are looking for records. So you're going to click that. Next slide, please. Now, what's going to come up is actually quite a long page of all these various databases and links for different types of research, if it's courts or directories or the vital statistics. Again, this is just a screenshot. And of course, it's great because births are usually the first ones that are on the list. So you see here several different databases of Ontario births. Now, what you need to do, or I should say the best way to do it, is you look first at that list for the dates that they encompass. You've got to have an estimate about when grandma was born. And so you pick one of these databases that is going to fit that estimated birth date. Then they're all going to be Ontario birth certificates, but then it's going to show where the repository is for this database. So many times it is Family Search, which is great because that's the program we're using. Occasionally it'll say Ancestry, but remember, you have to pay to subscribe to Ancestry. So I concentrated on 2 of these listings here. The third one had the date range, and it said Family Search, and then it said index and images. You want to try to find one that has the image part. The index is going to give you pertinent information that was taken from the birth certificate, but the image actually shows you it. So I actually picked, for my example, the very last one on this list, which was 1869 to 1912. And it is a family search database, and it does show index and images. So click that, and we will see the next slide. Okay, so now it brings up this database. You can see on the left, it shows you the Canada, Ontario births and the time frame. And we're going to use an imaginary case here. We're going to say grandma's name is Alice Louise Smith. Now, there is a place there for birthplace, and I should have filled it in with Ontario, Canada, but I didn't. And then there's a place for year of birth or death, and we don't really know exactly what it is. You could estimate it. And then, of course, we have the search button. So we're going to hit the search button and see what comes up. This is what comes up. And again, it's quite a long page of names and dates that somewhat match what we have put in our search box. And the second name on this list happens to be Alice Louise Smith. Now it says she was born the 3rd of December, 1911 in St. Catharines, Lincoln, Ontario, Canada. Well, I'm going to click on the link to her name there, Alice Louise Smith, and we're going to see what comes up. Next slide. So this is what we have. We have all the pertinent information that they took from the birth certificate and actually typed it up very nicely. But remember, it said image, index, and images were present. And we see on the left-hand side, there is an image. So we're going to click on that image. Next slide, please. So here we have the image, and it is actually a photo of the register that particular location used to write in all the births, etc. But it's, there's quite a lot on there, and I have to find my person. So I'm going to use the enlarge capability here by the plus sign that's in one of those little icons. And we're going to find something that we can actually read. So next slide, please. So here is the top of it. And who's first on the list in that first column? It is Smith Alice Louise, born December 3rd, 1911. It even gives the home address. As we go down, yes, she's a female. Is an interesting question. Were the parents married? Yes. Then the name of the father and his occupation and the name of the mother. So Thomas Smith was a gardener, and Alice is the mother. This particular register asks quite a lot of questions. Where were the parents married and when? So it listed that. Again, this is just a screenshot, and there are probably other questions down the line there. But we've got really a copy of the birth registration. Now, from my conversations with Amelia, she has said that usually if you had a copy of this image and some additional information, which is usually on the website when you're searching for this, it's the citation. Just like if you were doing a term paper, you have to say where you got the information. If you provide all of that data, that usually that is acceptable. Next slide, please. However, sometimes you don't find an image. And you may find the person's name, the date of birth, where, etc. But you may have to order a birth record on this. So the Province of Ontario website has this URL that is specifically for birth certificates. And when you go on there, you're going to find two categories: births before 1919 All you have to do is fill in an application and digitally pay a service fee. The second category is births after 1919. Canada is very strict about privacy laws. They do not publish pertinent information like birth information, etc., until 90 to 100 years after that birth. If it is prior to that time frame, only immediate and close family can make the request, and you would have to actually show some proof of that relationship. And then, of course, complete the application and pay the service fee. Next slide, please. So this is just a very small, short demonstration of one way that you can search one database. However, this may pique your interest in doing more genealogy. So maybe you might wonder if you're descended from a famous Canadian, or if you can trace your family back to the original French settlers. Those were in the 1600s. Or if you have ancestors who were Indigenous or First Nation. So if you're considering learning more about this, we are coming up with a workshop in March, Canadian Ancestry Workshop. And Shannon is going to be talking about this later on in her section and telling you how to register. And one last thing before I move on to Shannon is I want to plug my genealogy society, my local one. It's the Kalamazoo Valley Genealogical Society here in Kalamazoo. Their website is mikvgs.org. And you can go on there. There's a lot of good information. If you live in the Kalamazoo area, please consider joining us. You will learn a lot. And I think now it's time to turn this over to Shannon.
Well, thank you so much, Janine. It's such a fascinating topic to begin to find your ancestors, especially when you get surprises. It's such a delight to connect and also to find your relatives, because as we know more and more, French Canadians in particular populated a great deal of the United States, the diaspora, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. It turns out that we are related. So suddenly you find out you're not only Canadian, but that you're connected in a very deep way to many of the people around you who you never thought you had any other connection to. So thank you so much for doing this. And we will talk about the workshop towards the end of the presentation. So I'm going to talk, oh, it jumped there. Hold on one moment. Let me go back a moment. So if you've gotten this far and you know that you have a relative, you have an ancestor in Canada that was a Canadian, you already are Canadian. Embrace that. Hold on to that. And like Mike Myers says, no one is more Canadian than a Canadian who no longer lives in Canada. And as Bono says, the world needs more Canada. So, we're excited to bring on board more Canadians. The party doesn't start till the Canadians get there. So, we're gonna go with that. So there are some cultural considerations that you should keep in mind if you're thinking about moving to Canada. As a person who grew up in Windsor, Ontario, we were really in the shadow of America. We were surrounded by America. And there are things that we realized Americans had no idea about how Canada functions, what our culture is truly like. There's a lot of stereotypes. And so we would urge you, and we know there is an impetus for people right now to find their Canadian citizenship. But we would still urge you to slow down for a moment and take into consideration some of these things. So we'll touch base a little bit about building of a nation, how Canada came to be. Have some resources over to the right there. And as Amelia had alluded to earlier, we will send out a resource sheet. And I believe this program should be recording it was set up to automatically record. So we'll send that out at the same time, and then that way you can review that information. There's a site called the Great Canadian Bucket List, things that you should definitely try to do, get into Canada to do. The Canadian System of Government, that there's a website that is excellent. It's a teacher resource, and it really breaks things down in a great way. So we're going to talk very briefly about our Indigenous peoples and the relationship between all Canadians. Canada is an amazing country, but we by no means are a perfect country. And that goes along with our treatment of our Indigenous peoples. There is much work to be done to repair that rift, and we are working on it. There's something called Truth and Reconciliation. And I strongly urge you to read the book by Murray Sinclair, Who We Are, which is about First Nations and truth and reconciliation and so much more. Murray Sinclair was a senator. He was a judge. Back when I was in high school, he came into his own and became very prominent. He was the first Indigenous senator, and just an amazing man. I strongly urge you to read that. Get familiar with what Orange Shirt Day is. I'm just going to leave that there. I'm not going to get into it a whole bunch because there's some backstory to that in regards to residential schools. Learn about the Great Expulsions. So the reason there's so much of a diaspora in the United States, or part of the reason, are a couple of expulsions that occurred in the 17 and 1800s. It's also called Le Grand Déplacement, and this has resulted in the Acadians leaving Canada, being forced to leave under threat of execution in some cases, to move into the United States through what we call the French corridor, all the way down the Mississippi into Louisiana, and setting up shop as the Cajuns in Louisiana. So it turns out, just as an example, that my family, the Arsenault family, actually has a branch in Louisiana, and they're quite well known. And it's really exciting to know that as an Acadian and Canadian, that I have relatives, hundreds, if not thousands of miles away in another state. So it's pretty exciting for me. We'll talk briefly about the political system, not to get into politics, but just to open your eyes a little bit to how it works. We'll talk about multiculturalism and the mosaic, just touching on language and immigration in the 21st century. And at the end, I'm going to talk about how do Canadians feel? What are their concerns? And these are real issues that you should be aware of. So building a nation, our nation was built on the Indigenous foundations of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And that is something first and foremost to recognize, acknowledge, and get to understand. Colonists, the French were one of the first, actually Vikings were the first Europeans to land in Canada, but in terms of settlement, the French came in the 16th century, then the British, and then other Europeans. Expansion was a little bit different than in the United States. Although the first explorers went out, the Mounties went out and set up forts, and then the people typically came afterwards. So it's a little bit of a different scenario than in the west of the United States, when people went out and settled the land, and then the law came following. So it's a different mindset. It's a different psychology that Canadians were born under. Canada became the Dominion of Canada and became its own country in 1867 through the British North American Act. And our own flag, the flag that you probably only recognize, the maple leaf, was actually adopted in 1965, the year I was born. So, oops, I just told everybody how old I am. But that's when. So we are a fairly young country. Our actual full Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms was created in 1982. So we had a lot of other countries to look at and examples that we could use to learn from. And I think that it did us well. So a quick overview of how the Canadian government works. We do have a crown. We are a constitutional parliament, and or democratic parliament. And we do still have a relationship to the crown, but it's mostly ceremonial. In the House of Commons, they're known as the Governor General. The Senate is similar to the United States. It's an independently appointed complementary role. It is not meant to be a solitary role in government. They do age out at age 75, which is something that I think is very beneficial. And often they are not members of a political party. That is a very different approach, I think. The House of Commons, this is where the MPs debate, where the Prime Minister sits. And you should know that we have a multi-party system in Canada, not just two parties, but Liberal, Progressive Conservatives, New Democrats, the Green Party. There are several others that can form coalitions to help support even a minority government can have a coalition that can create a situation where they can still be in power. This allows us to the ability to balance by forming alliances. The Senate introduces bills, reviews them, represents and addresses imbalances. The House of Commons, this is where the members of the political party that represent a region are going to be. And we have something called a vote of no confidence, and there have been 3 in my lifetime. So it really does happen. And when that happens, their own party will vote out that leader. And I think this is a safeguard that has served Canada well. Ridings are typically determined by a nonpartisan committee. So in terms of the term gerrymandering, it's not how it works in Canada. So it is a much more bipartisan and even nonpartisan procedure. So let's talk about some of the cultural subtleties. The personality of Canadians versus Americans. It's just a very different approach. And, frankly, my family used to refer to me as the American in the family because I'm very bold. I'm very, I do things real quick and I like to, and I'm very, my sister will call me pushy, whatever. I'm a very bold, forward person. Canadians are much more subtle than that. As a whole, there are obviously ingenuity and all of that, but just in terms of personality, that's one of the major things. Something you should be aware of is that red is not right and blue is not left. It's actually the reverse. I had someone criticize me because I was wearing a hat and they thought it represented a particular flavor. And I had to explain to them that in Canada, red is actually the Liberal Party. So be aware of that. There are many regional and geographic differences. Canada is a vast country, like the United States, and the personalities vary from the East Coast to the West Coast, the prairies, the territories. Each one really does have their distinct personalities that you should get to know and think about which one works with your own family's personalities. And owning your Canadianness. Canada is really coming into its own right now, defining itself. It's hard to really define Canadian culture because we are a mosaic country, and we solidified that in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we want people to continue to embrace and eschew their culture, but still want to be Canadian citizens. Our humor is definitely on the wry side, and we do tend to swear a lot. I don't know why, but we tend to find that it helps us somehow, makes us feel better. I'm not sure whether it's French or English. And as a French Canadian, those are mostly the things that I still remember. But that's just a little bit of the fun stuff. But, some of you may have heard that Catherine O'Hara passed away day before yesterday. And she was an amazing comedian and just a phenomenal individual. Humor is one of our strong suits. It's one of our exports. So now we get to talking about the elephant in the room. What concerns do you have about uprooting and moving to Canada? What concerns do Canadians have about you uprooting and moving to Canada? And how do they feel about Bill C3? I've spent a fair amount of time in the last month following, reading, summarizing, although I'm not going to quote any one particular individual here. And I just want to give you some of the high-level overviews of some of the things that you should probably pay attention to. As I had mentioned earlier, Canada is not a utopia. Do you have all the information you need to pick up and move and where you're going to move? So some of the things you need to be aware of are the implications of healthcare. Even though, yes, Canada does have universal healthcare, there are some restrictions when you first move in because it's based on residency, not on citizenship. So even as a Canadian, if I moved back to Canada, I would have to make arrangements for healthcare for the first 3 to 6 months, depending on the province. That's the other thing. Every province does it slightly differently, but you won't receive a bill that will bankrupt your family through healthcare. On the other side of it, there is a healthcare crisis right now, and that is improving. They are working on it tremendously, and that crisis varies depending on where you're located. And we'll talk about bigger cities in just a moment. Housing right now, much like in the United States, is a challenge. The cost of housing has gone up tremendously, and finding suitable housing is very important if you're going to relocate to Canada. So these are pieces and parts of the puzzle that you're going to want to look into. You're going to also want to consider societal challenges like crime and addiction. Mind you, in comparison to many other countries, that is very low, but there still are pockets in big cities, especially, where crime is a problem. It has been reducing over the last several years. As a matter of fact, it dropped by 4% in 2024 across the board. But you should investigate where you want to go. Bigger cities in Canada have the same social ills and challenges as anywhere else in the world. So keep that in mind. As much as I love my home country, we also want to be honest and genuine about it. So from all accounts, everything that I've read, Canadians want Canadians to come home. But what about those who have reservations about Bill C3? Well, there are some reservations, and it's not really about you, it's more really about the bill itself. So they want to ensure that there's fairness and equality. When it comes to Bill C3, they want to make sure that the law is not creating inequities for those who already have full citizenship to those who are newly recognized as citizens or descendants. And even though the bill aims to remedy past injustices of the first generation and lost Canadians, they want to make sure it's being applied fairly. Proof and burden of evidence. The requirement that a Canadian parent demonstrate 3 years of cumulative days of physical presence in Canada to confer citizenship raises concerns about the documentation access, the border records, school records, employment records, and the burden on families to prove that connection. The administrative capacity and delays. Citizens and advocates fear processing backlogs and inconsistent adjudication as these rules are implemented and restore status to many affected people. Recently, in a page, I saw that there were about 40,000 people who had already applied for citizenship by descent. So you're going to have to be prepared that it's going to take a period of time for those processes to be completed. And remember, Canada is a country of 41 million people, of which about 8 million of those people were added in the last 10 years. So there's a bit of a, stretching of the resources there, and they're going to do the best they can. Integrity and fraud prevention. So there has been expression of some concerns about safeguarding citizenship integrity, ensuring that the connection test is not circumvented, that's that 3-year rule, while balancing humane treatment of descendants and lost Canadians. Social and service impacts. So this is what I was referring to earlier. Municipalities and service providers worry about short-term demands on settlement services, documentation clinics, and identifying political verification systems if large cohorts of people seek citizenship simultaneously, which is what is really happening right now. There is going to be a glut into the system, and it's going to take a while for that to work itself out. So political and symbolic debates. The bill has prompted some debate about national identity, diaspora ties, and whether restoring citizenship rights should be prioritized over other forms of immigration or social policy goals. We know that Canadians should be recognized as Canadians. And once you've done that and you have your documentation, no matter what, if you choose to repatriate to Canada, love her, care for her, and be her champion. Remember her for everything that she's trying to do for the world and for herself. And that means you too, as a Canadian. So at this point, I would like to take a moment to just invite you to attend the Canadian Ancestry Workshop. We will be limiting this to about 95, I think, the first go round, to see, because it is a big ask to try and answer questions and help people through these processes. We will be offering 2 free 1-hour Zoom classes from 7 to 8 p.m. on Tuesday, March 2nd and Tuesday, March 24th. This is going to include access to various genealogy tools to help you in your research. We'll help you to download a free genealogy software program, and we'll also be able to help you note the citations of where you found each person and event. I can tell you firsthand from starting this process, this is very important. And Janine and I have been talking about this for about 1.5 years. So I'm very excited to see it come to fruition. Janine will share some do's and don'ts of genealogy, and she's going to do some demonstrations of additional genealogy databases. If you would like to join our workshop to delve deeper into your heritage, the application or the registration is on our website at canadianifest.fun. So now is time for some questions that are going to be summarized by our moderators. We're going to focus on the ones that are most being requested. So with that, I'm going to just pull up my phone here and see what our first question is and see who it's for. I'm sure it's going to be for Amelia. So first questions. What is the test and requirements for documents? I'm not sure what test means other than what qualifies as a document, maybe. Amelia, can you answer that question?
Yes. So essentially what you're trying to prove is that you're eligible. And how are you eligible? By proving your Canadian ancestry, but you have to follow the line, right? And a common question that I get, and I saw that it was popping up in the questions as well, is that it's possible that the ancestors before you didn't apply for proof of Canadian citizenship. So you're not necessarily looking for having everyone before you already to have proof of Canadian citizenship, but you do have to prove that they were citizens. So for example, if someone, because it's possible that even if you have someone that of Canadian ancestry, then someone could have lost it along the way, and then the future generations are not eligible. And so that's why you have to trace it back. And typically, if you have multiple Canadian ancestors in your past, you want to focus on the closest one to you, because then you have less generations to go through. You don't have to continue to prove further and further back generations. As soon as you have one and you can trace it down to you, that's fine. I saw another question that was asking also about if multiple people. Typically, the applications that I do at the firm with families, they're all individual applications, but you put them all in the same package because it's more efficient and you'll get faster responses, if they can all be processed together. You do still have to include the evidence for each individual application because it is individual, so they could distribute it technically to different officers, but most of the time they keep them together. And based on the citizenship certificates that I've been receiving, they tend to process them together because we get the certificates on the same day when the packages are put together in one packet.
So do these have to be, this is a question from me, do these applications have to be downloaded, printed out, done on paper, and then mailed in, or can they be done online?
So there's actually a questionnaire that you can do within the government site that will tell people if you can do it online or in paper. Most of the ones that I've done have to have been done in paper. So you mail it in.
What is the website address? Do you know that?
I don't know it. I can add it to the resources. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. I know I've seen it myself and I've looked through it, but because I didn't have to go through it, I didn't do the whole process. But it did look fairly navigable. It didn't look ridiculous. All right. The next question is, do adoptions count and or how does that work? For example, a grandparent or parent was adopted.
I'm so glad that that question was asked because I meant to do that. I meant to say that. So yes, there is likely going to be some litigation with adoptions down the line. If you are interested in this topic, actually, you can find the debates when this bill was coming into force, because there are some issues with adoptions where adoptees are sometimes treated differently. But for the purposes of this bill, if there's adoption in your family, you're still eligible, but the evidence can be different. And so, if you just want to look at how that's different, I would encourage you to look up the application when someone is applying for Canadian citizenship through adoption. There is going to be different evidentiary requirements, and you're going to want to apply those same evidentiary requirements into the proof of citizenship application. It tends to be a little bit different.
Okay. There are many questions about great grandparents or further removed generations. Are there limitations? How does that work?
Yeah, so if you were born, the key date here is December 15th, 2025, which I'm sure everyone was born before that date here. So for everyone that was born before, there is no longer any generational limit. So the first generation limit was removed, and that was one of the concerns when this was being debated. When this law was coming to be, there was concerns that this was opening the floodgates and people that had no connection to Canada or very, very far removed could have access, but that is how the law passed. And so right now, there are no limits to the amount of generations. And then going forward, there's going to be the substantial connection test, which tries to address some of the concerns that people do have to have, at least a substantial connection to be eligible. But right now, if it's before that date, you don't have to necessarily have spent 3 years in Canada or anything like that.
And as you had pointed out earlier, if you don't take this opportunity to apply and prove citizenship, there could be a law change that will remove that. How far back? Because I know Ireland, for instance, my grandfather was born in Ireland. I could apply for Irish citizenship, but I don't believe they go beyond grandparents. Germany, I believe it is like it is right now with Canada. So every country has a different way of doing it. And if you don't take advantage of it now, it may not be there for you in the future. That's something for everybody to take into consideration. And I'll just say this now, I'm not trying to convince everyone to become a Canadian and move to Canada. This is just a part of what I do in the process of offering Canadian culture here in the United States. The Canadiana Fest is here to share Canadian culture, not just the material culture, but also her culture of kindness. And I feel that this is an extension of that. Another question is, where can we see the recording later? So the recording will be sent out by link I will upload it to YouTube, and then I'll send out that link along with the resource papers that we are looking at putting together for you that will hopefully give you some places to look. And I would also like to share something that I've found very helpful to me. I've been reading Your Move to Canada, and this is really about the financial aspect of moving to Canada. There are some very important things you should know. And this book was written by two authors, Sonia, I may say this incorrectly, Sonia Dolgina and Clark Linton. And I'm about a third of the way through the book. Very informative. I highly recommend it. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's good reading and definitely information you need to know. Let's see, were there other questions that people had? I am not seeing any further questions.
Shannon, there was a question about costs related to these kinds of applications.
About to copy and paste that into there right now.
Thank you. So the question is about cost. What is the cost to apply for your Canadian citizenship by descent?
Pay the application fees, $649.75 per adult, which includes the processing fee and the right of citizenship fee, and $100 per minor.
So did you say $649?
Yeah, 600. Might as well make it 650. So yeah, per
Can I
adult.
just?
That's Canadian.
I'll just I'll type.
This is something that, as a cultural thing, you'll find that Canadians go, but that's American. Is that American or Canadian? That's Canadian.
Yeah, that's
so
Canadian.
that's about $500
Yep.
US plus $100 per minor. Does that sound right, Amelia?
Yep.
So that is for Canadian citizenship when you're applying, as a permanent resident, and then you apply for Canadian citizenship. So it's a little bit different because with this, you're actually applying for proof of Canadian citizenship. So you are applying, so the amount, I believe it's around $75 actually.
Yes, that's the next one.
Okay, there we go. So the answer is applying for citizenship by descent. So basically proof of citizenship is $75 Canadian. That's pretty reasonable amount to be able to solidify your heritage and to have proof of your citizenship. That's a pretty reasonable thing, I would have to say.
Another thing of concern seems to be about this idea of people renouncing citizenship and understanding that process. Can you
Amelia,
speak to
I'm going
that?
to let you take this one on.
Yeah, so essentially it is because the law has changed over time. There are periods of time where dual citizenship wasn't recognized. There are periods of time, and you have to remember that the people that are reviewing these applications, there's thousands of applications already. There was thousands before even this law came to be under the interim measures. And so when I have because I do consultations with people that have gone through this process. When I've met with people that have had their applications denied or returned, one of the most common issues turns on the evidence isn't there. They haven't provided sufficient evidence. And so best practice when you're putting together an application is that you want to make it very easy for the officer that's reviewing your application to see why you qualify. And so what do you have to prove that you qualify is you have to prove that you have that you are eligible based on your subsequent generations. And so, because for example, if someone lost their citizenship, so for example, before 1947, people were British subjects. If they naturalized elsewhere, they ceased to be British subjects. And so when the 1947 Act passed, the people that were no longer British subjects didn't become Canadian citizens on that day. It is possible that laws subsequent to that, there have been many changes that they then regained Canadian citizenship essentially. But when you're putting together the application, you want to spell that out. You want to make it clear. You don't want to just, give a general statement. Well, they lost their citizenship, but then Canada recognized dual citizenship later on, and so they're citizens. That's too vague. That's not specific enough to your situation. So you have to truly take the time to see what dates they were born, what the law was then. Did they become citizens with the 1947 Act? If they didn't become citizens in the 1947 Act, what change happened subsequent to this that gave them citizenship? There was also a certain period of time, when people had to take certain steps in order to maintain their citizenship if they were born abroad. So because there have been so many different changes to the citizenship law, that's the part that tends to be the trickiest part of these applications. And of course, then it's also finding the proper documents and making sure that you have the citations and the correct, they like to see color copies, and they can request further evidence if there's issues about credibility or if they think that the documents have been messed with to provide eligibility. But when you first apply, you provide the color copies of the documents and then a cover letter explaining why each generation was a Canadian and why you are a Canadian as well.
And, if you are feeling overwhelmed and you don't know how to get through this is where somebody like Amelia can be a resource for you. And you should certainly reach out to her to get those questions answered, consult with her. And, whatever works best for you and your family is certainly what's most important. And regardless of what you do when you figure out that you are a Canadian, we just want you to do the thing that's right for you and your family. It's very important right now that people focus on that. Jax and Dan, were there any other questions that are standing out to you?
No, they're all very, very specific. So nothing about nothing that's generalized.
Yeah, that's a tough one. So specific questions about particular circumstances is incredibly difficult for us to answer in this setting. I know Amelia is available as a resource. As we're offering, Janine and I, the genealogy coming up, that might be an opportunity to find out, what the records really say and help in that manner. But we apologize. There's just very difficult for us with hundreds. Literally, we had over 300 people register for this event, that we really can't answer individual questions about very particular circumstances. I apologize for that. I wish we had the ability to do that. With
Shannon?
that, yes?
This is Janine. May I interrupt just for a moment?
Oh, of course, Janine.
There is something that I forgot to talk about, and I did see a couple of questions in the chat related to it.
Okay.
And it is mostly appropriate for Quebec. And since that's all my research, I know that in Quebec, they did not have civil registrations for birth for years. They always relied on baptismal records. Now, Quebec was predominantly Catholic, and the priests kept exceptionally good records for births, marriages, and deaths. And the baptismal certificate can be a substitute for the birth certificate. So, for instance, if you go on ancestry.com, you can find the just by a search. And again, it's an image, and you can download the image, plus it will give you a citation. So I've used that before in some of my research. So that's something to remember and consider.
And that's an excellent point to make. And also, I'm sure there are many French Canadian descendants out here, and you're probably going to struggle with the French language, let alone the script, the handwriting that everything was in. So I'm not sure if Janine, if that's something that you have some tips and tricks up your sleeve for the genealogy workshop that you can share with us. It is difficult to read script. We do have some people who are bilingual who might be able to help decipher some things. And there's also some good translating um, uh, apps now. Maybe not the script, but certainly the words that you can put into the translator. And there's a French Canadian one with Google Translate that does help decipher some of that information.
And the religious acts of birth, marriage, and burial, really, it's not death. They followed a script. So it's the same language in every one. Every birth has the same language, and almost like fill in the blanks. So once you get used to it and you understand what the general format is and what the words mean through like a Google Translate, you can really pick out quite a lot and determine if you think that that's maybe your ancestry.
Yeah, these are called sacraments, and it's very, as you say, it's very regimented. There's a pattern of, how this is entered, and the information is the same across the board, and for centuries. I mean, literally, very little changed in the Roman Catholic Church. So we have that to thank, at least. But we're at about 7:19, 7:20. I had a couple more slides. And if we don't have any further questions, and some might come up before this is over, and we'll still entertain them. But let's just talk about, what are you going to do beyond Bill C3? Well, I will invite you to come to the Canadiana Fest in the fall. The date's still to be determined, but we would love to have you here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. You can look us up and find out a little bit about us. There's some good video out there. We have an awful lot of fun, and we'd love to, embrace our new Canadian cousins and welcome you to the fold. The other things to consider doing, once this is established, is connect with other Canadian groups. There is the French Canadian Heritage Society, the French Heritage Corridor. Get involved in Canadian hobbies or sports, curling, crokinole, lacrosse. There's so much music and art. Many of you may know that many authors that you're familiar with, Margaret Atwood, Anne of Green Gables series, those are all Canadian art. Get to know it, enjoy it, embrace it. It's yours. In the United States, there are many Canadian groups on Facebook, and those groups then try to have events that bring people together. So in my case, in Michigan, I host a group called Canadians in Michigan, and we welcome everyone from what we jokingly refer to as Canadian curious, the Canadian adjacent, the Canadian forward, and occasionally we have the Canadian envious, those who really want to be a Canadian. But if you've made it this far and you did find your descendant of a Canadian, then you're already there. So we would love to have you join us, Canadians in Michigan. There's always other states. I know that the zip codes that we collected in the registration showed me that we had people joining this webinar from all the way from the East Coast to the West Coast, all the way down to the very southern part of the United States. And it's obvious that this is a big topic. We will share, as I said, the video, the recording, and that will be on YouTube so that if others want to watch it, they can. And hopefully we have done something to help along our fellow Canadians. And here's the thing, visit Canada. Go to Canada, fly to Montreal, find a place that you've heard about and go there. Go to the north. It is an absolutely incredibly beautiful, and in some places pristine beauty, natural beauty that everyone should get a chance to enjoy. Not just the people who live there, but those who want to show their appreciation and get to know the country a little bit better.
There are a lot of comments saying thank you to Amelia, Janine, and Shannon for putting this on. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Oh, thank you. You know, we're pleased to do this. Geneaology is a passion project for me, and I am always thrilled to know that there are people who want to also help make it happen. So I will invite those of you who can, if you would like to volunteer, get involved in some way, please reach out to me through the website or the email that I sent out the Zoom link on, and get involved. Just thanks so much for caring. And here is the contact information for Amelia, for myself, and for Janine. And we'll leave that up on the screen for a couple of minutes. But thank you everyone for taking the time and, you know, for seeking out, for seeking us out, and for just being interested in becoming a Canadian. As a Canadian myself, born and bred and raised, I'm incredibly proud of my homeland. And I would just say to you, as someone who is a product of Canada, I'm grateful for everything that they did. The we over me philosophy, which is probably one of the biggest things about Canadian culture, gave me opportunities in my life that I don't think I would have had I been born somewhere else. And so that does drive me to continue to try and do things like this to help others. And just being kind, just be kind. You know, wear your Canadian flag, wear your little maple leaf pin. When you go to Europe, you can legitimately wear that maple leaf pin now, and be able to say that you are a Canadian. And we embrace you. And again, thank you very much. And with that, I think I'll end the session. So au revoir, goodbye. Hope we'll see you sometime soon. Take care, everyone.